I used to be worth $2.1 million. Now I'm watching my penis rot off, and no doctor can tell me how to stop it. 4 months ago, I was Marcus, Silicon Valley principal engineer, $340,000 salary, Tesla in the garage, penthouse overlooking South Bay. Today, I'm a ghost living in an apartment that reeks of decay and antiseptic. My genitals look like something from a medical horror textbook. Black necrotic tissue, ulcerated lesions that won't stop spreading, a smell so foul I can detect it through 3 layers of clothing. The medical bills have crossed $40,000. I've seen 6 specialists. None of them can identify what's eating me alive, but I know exactly where it started. Lagos, Nigeria, 10 days, 7 women. One decision that turned my body into a decomposing nightmare I can't wake up from. The standard STI tests, all negative. The fungal cultures, inconclusive. The experimental treatments, worthless. My doctors throw around terms like treatment-resistant and atypical presentation, while my flesh continues to die, inch by inch. I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here because the isolation is killing me faster than whatever pathogen is consuming my body. This confession is the only human connection I have left. If you've ever made a decision you knew was wrong but did it anyway, drop a comment, because what I'm about to confess destroyed everything: my career, my body, and whatever was left of my soul. Let me take you back to February 2024, when I still believed my life was on track. I'd done everything right. Stanford computer science degree, climbed from junior developer to principal engineer in 8 years. At 34, I was pulling $340,000 base plus stock options that had vaulted my net worth past $2 million. The penthouse, the Tesla Model S Plaid, the investment portfolio. I had the Silicon Valley dream down to the algorithm. But here's what LinkedIn profiles don't show: the 3+ hours I spent daily on company shuttles, watching my life pass through tinted windows. The Slack notifications detonating my phone at 2 a.m. because the Bangalore team hit a production bug. The networking events where every conversation felt like a performance review disguised as friendship. My social behaviors had become code. Dating apps optimized like A/B tests. Swipe patterns calculated for maximum matches. Conversation templates refined for conversion rates. Weekend trips to Austin and Seattle that were just extensions of the office. Same co-working spaces, same discussions about market valuations and system scalability. Even my hobbies were strategic: rock climbing for executive networking, meditation apps to manage burnout, biohacking supplements to maximize productivity. The ultimate irony? I built cloud infrastructure that connected millions of people globally. Our systems handled real-time communications for users who were laughing, crying, falling in love through interfaces I'd helped design. Meanwhile, I couldn't remember the last time I'd had a conversation that wasn't transactional. By early 2024, the health anxiety started creeping in, not from actual symptoms. I was physically fine, but this persistent, gnawing sense that something was fundamentally wrong with my existence. That persistent feeling that my body was a machine running faulty code, and I was too busy optimizing other systems to debug my own life. Late nights became my refuge. After merging pull requests and closing tickets, I'd fall down Reddit rabbit holes searching for something I couldn't articulate. Travel forums about authentic experiences. Threads discussing places where normal rules didn't apply. Digital nomad communities talking about breaking free from Western constraints. I wasn't looking for tourist destinations. I was hunting for an escape hatch from a life that looked perfect on paper, but felt like suffocation in practice. The posts about Lagos started appearing around midnight searches, not the typical travel content. These discussions used careful language, euphemisms, coded recommendations, comments about how different the experience was for Americans with money, how you could access things that the sanitized, HR-approved, algorithm-driven Silicon Valley life would never permit. But success in tech comes with its own prison, and I was about to trade one cage for something far worse. The thread appeared at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday while I was debugging a microservices authentication issue. Someone had posted a question about alternative tourism in West Africa, and the responses were careful, strategic, the kind of coded language you recognize when you've spent years in tech communities that discuss gray area topics. Lagos is different if you have dollars. Allen Avenue. That's all I'll say. Rules are different for Americans with money. I should have closed the browser. Instead, I opened a new research document. What followed was weeks of obsessive investigation. I approached it exactly like system architecture, breaking down a complex problem into manageable components, gathering data, identifying patterns. I told myself this was intellectual curiosity, anthropological interest. I consumed academic papers from JSTOR about sexual economies in developing nations, WHO reports on commercial sex work in West Africa, travel blogs that danced around explicit details but provided enough information to construct a map. I learned that Lagos had over 15 million people, that Allen Avenue in Ikeja had transformed from a business district into the city's primary red light area by the 1980s. I studied the economics, how Nigerian civil servant salaries averaged $200 monthly, how university students at University of Lagos worked to pay tuition, how the informal sexual economy provided income that formal employment couldn't match. I read about the motels, Peka Hotel and dozens of others, where negotiations happened in lobbies and transactions concluded upstairs. The rationalization framework I constructed was impressively sophisticated. I convinced myself I was participating in a voluntary economic exchange. These women had agency. They'd chosen this work. My American dollars would provide genuine economic benefit, tuition payments, family support, capital for future businesses. If anything, I was being ethical by engaging in transparent commercial transactions rather than the exploitative dynamics of Western dating culture. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain this framework was staggering, but I'd spent years managing complex mental models. If I could hold distributed system architectures in my head, I could certainly justify a 2-week trip to Lagos. I learned basic Yoruba phrases, researched Nigerian customs and social etiquette, studied the geography so I could navigate between Victoria Island's business hotels and the mainland areas where the real action happened. I read health forums about tropical diseases and prevention strategies. I bought condoms in bulk, researched post-exposure prophylaxis protocols for HIV, made spreadsheets tracking immunization requirements and anti-malarial medications. Have you ever rationalized something you knew was wrong? Hit that like button if you've been there, because I convinced myself I was doing research. That preparation equaled responsibility. That planning made exploitation somehow acceptable. I booked the flights in January, Murtala Muhammad International to San Francisco, round trip, business class. 2 weeks in Lagos. I listed the trip on my work calendar as remote work/personal travel. My last thought before confirming the reservation was how thoroughly I'd prepared, how responsible I was being. I told myself I was being responsible. Looking back, that might be the most delusional part of this entire confession. The heat hit me the moment I stepped off the plane at Murtala Muhammad International. February in Lagos isn't just warm, it's oppressive, the kind of humidity that glues your shirt to your skin before you've cleared customs. The airport was sensory chaos. Afro-beat music competing with diesel generators, the smell of palm oil and exhaust fumes mixing in the thick air, yellow Danfo buses weaving between luxury SUVs and motorcycle taxis. This wasn't the sanitized international terminal experience I knew from business travel. This was raw, unfiltered, overwhelming. I'd booked a suite at the Echo Hotel and Suites on Victoria Island. Luxury accommodations close to the business district, maintaining the fiction that this was a legitimate work trip. The staff were professional, welcoming, but I caught something in their eyes, a subtle assessment. Another wealthy American, probably tech or oil, here for reasons they understood without asking. The first 3 days, I played the part. I visited tech companies in Lagos, networked with local developers. The Nigerian tech scene was genuinely impressive. Fintech startups processing billions, innovative mobile banking solutions, genuine entrepreneurial energy. I could have written an article about Lagos as an emerging tech hub and meant every word, but by day 4, the pretense became unbearable. I hired a driver through the hotel concierge. His name was Kemi, a soft-spoken Yoruba man in his 40s who'd worked with international visitors before. That phrase was code, and we both knew it. "You want to see the real Lagos?" he asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "Yes." "Afternoon or evening?" "Evening." He nodded. No judgment, just transaction. Allen Avenue on Thursday night was exactly what my research had prepared me for, and nothing like I'd actually expected. Neon signs advertising clubs and entertainment centers. The mixture of legitimate restaurants and obvious fronts. Women in colorful traditional wrappers standing beside others in Western club wear. The economic stratification was visible in every interaction. Who quoted prices in dollars versus naira, who the bouncers assessed as worth their attention. Kemi facilitated introductions. His role was translator, negotiator, logistics coordinator. He knew which establishments were safer, which to avoid, how to navigate the social dynamics I couldn't see. Over 10 days, I engaged with 7 different women in commercial transactions. I won't catalog the specifics. That's not why I'm confessing this. But their stories haunt me more than the medical consequences. One was 23, studying economics at University of Lagos. Tuition was 500,000 naira annually, about $600, but her family couldn't afford it. This work paid what 3 months of legitimate employment couldn't. Another was a civil servant, administrative work that paid 35,000 naira monthly. Barely $40. She had 2 children. The math was brutal and simple. Some had university degrees. Others communicated through gestures and Kemi's translation. Each negotiation followed the same pattern: discussion of terms, agreement on price, movement to modest hotels in Ikeja or nearby areas, cash transactions. Condoms used consistently, not from respect for their health, but from my paranoia about infections. The power differential created artificial intimacy that felt more real than anything I'd experienced through dating apps or networking events. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely present, unmediated by screens or professional protocols. The conversations before and after, when they happened, felt human in ways my Silicon Valley interactions never had. The psychological trap was perfect. I told myself I was being ethical within the framework of commercial sex, that using condoms was responsible, that my dollars were providing genuine economic benefit, that these were voluntary transactions between consenting adults. But consent under economic duress isn't really consent, and I knew that. Deep down, beneath the rationalizations, I knew exactly what I was participating in. The hollowness underneath the physical gratification was profound. Each encounter left me feeling more empty, more disconnected, more aware that whatever I was searching for couldn't be purchased. The intimacy was performance, skillfully delivered by women who needed my money more than I needed whatever delusion of connection I was buying. I had to exploit vulnerable women 7,000 miles away to feel human connection. That should have told me everything. On my last day in Lagos, as I packed my bags in the hotel suite, I felt something, a slight irritation around the head of my penis, barely noticeable. The kind of minor discomfort you attribute to excessive activity or humid climate. Nothing serious. Just the beginning of my body's revenge. The irritation persisted through my final evening in Lagos, a mild burning when I urinated. Nothing alarming, just uncomfortable enough to register. I attributed it to the humid climate, maybe friction from excessive activity. The kind of minor complaint that didn't warrant interrupting my departure schedule. The flight back to San Francisco was 20+ hours of misery. Not just the usual long-haul discomfort, but something else. A persistent wrongness I couldn't articulate. Like system warnings that hadn't escalated to critical errors yet. The burning sensation intensified every time I used the cramped airplane bathroom. I drank less water to avoid the pain, which only made everything worse. By the time I reached my South Bay apartment, the irritation had evolved into something more concerning. Red patches circled the head of my penis, slightly raised, with a texture that reminded me of sandpaper. Not smooth skin anymore, something rough, foreign, wrong. I spent that first night back Googling symptoms. Every search led deeper into medical horror. Antibiotic-resistant gonorrhea, drug-resistant syphilis, tropical bacterial infections. The WebMD rabbit hole at 2 a.m. is never reassuring. But this was different. The images I found online didn't quite match what I was seeing, which was somehow more terrifying than finding an exact match. By day 3, denial became impossible. The burning during urination had become genuinely painful, like passing acid through inflamed tissue. A discharge appeared, yellowish, with a consistency I won't describe in detail. But the smell, God, the smell, foul and distinctly biological, the kind of odor that signals decay. I could detect it even through boxer briefs and jeans. The red patches developed a scaly quality. When I touched them, compulsively checking every few hours, they felt rough, almost bark-like. The color deepened from light pink to angry red. I knew I needed medical attention. Every rational part of my brain screamed that delaying treatment was dangerous. But the shame was already metastasizing faster than any infection. How would I explain this to a doctor? How would I code this interaction in my mental framework of professional identity? I was Marcus, the principal engineer, the guy with the $340,000 salary and stock options. The person who'd architected payment systems handling millions of transactions. I wasn't Marcus, the sex tourist with an STI contracted in a Lagos hotel room. The cognitive dissonance was crushing. I'd spent weeks researching, preparing, telling myself I was being responsible. I'd used condoms consistently, I'd been careful, and yet here I was, watching my genitals transform into something unrecognizable, too ashamed to seek help, falling into medical search engine rabbit holes at 3 a.m., while my body continued its transformation into something I no longer recognized as mine. The warnings had escalated to critical, but I still couldn't bring myself to acknowledge the system failure. I waited 3 days before making an appointment. 3 days of watching the patches spread, of smelling my own decay, of constructing elaborate excuses for why I couldn't seek help. Finally, the physical symptoms overwhelmed the psychological ones. Dr. Patricia Hernandez at the UCSF Comprehensive STI Clinic was professional and completely non-judgmental. Somehow that made it worse. Her clinical detachment forced me to confront reality without the emotional buffering that shame might have provided. "When did you first notice these symptoms?" she asked, photographing the lesions for medical records. "About a week ago. I recently returned from international travel." "Where specifically?" The pause felt longer than any loading time I'd ever experienced debugging code. "Nigeria, Lagos." She nodded, typing notes without visible reaction. "Sexual contact during travel?" "Yes. Protected? I used condoms consistently." The words felt pathetically inadequate, even as I said them. The examination yielded multiple swabs and blood draws. But Dr. Hernandez's expression suggested she was encountering something atypical. "I'm testing for the standard panel: chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, HSV-1 and 2, HIV. But I'm also ordering additional cultures. The presentation here is unusual. The waiting period for results transformed my health anxiety into something approaching full psychological crisis. Every minor sensation triggered catastrophic thinking. Every Google search revealed new terrors: necrotizing fasciitis, penile cancer, antibiotic-resistant bacterial strains emerging from developing nations. The NIH database became my obsessive reading material, filled with case studies of mysterious urogenital infections. 5 days later, Dr. Hernandez called with results. The standard STI panel came back negative. All of it. No chlamydia, no gonorrhea, no syphilis, no herpes. HIV negative. The relief lasted approximately 30 seconds before morphing into something far more terrifying. If it wasn't a common STI, what the hell was it? "We need additional testing," Dr. Hernandez explained during the follow-up appointment. "Sometimes after international travel, we see unusual presentations. Regional pathogens that aren't common in the US. The second round included bacterial cultures, fungal analyses, PCR testing for less common pathogens, more waiting, more watching my genitals transform into something increasingly alien. The scaly patches were spreading, now covering perhaps 20% of the shaft. The texture was becoming more pronounced, rough, thick, distinctly abnormal. The results came back inconclusive. Some bacterial growth, but nothing definitive. Possible fungal elements, but species identification was uncertain. My case was accumulating the kind of medical mystery status that makes physicians simultaneously intrigued and deeply uncomfortable. 2 weeks after returning from Lagos, Dr. Hernandez introduced a new possibility. "We're seeing fungal elements that might be consistent with Trichophyton mentagrophytes genotype 7, she said, consulting her notes. "It's an emerging dermatophyte that can be sexually transmitted." I'd never heard of it. My immediate research revealed a newly recognized pathogen, TM7, first identified in Europe, with cases emerging in New York among travelers to Southeast Asia and Europe. The symptoms matched my presentation almost perfectly. red, scaly rashes on genital areas that could spread, intense itching progressing to pain, and most troubling, resistance to standard antifungal treatments. Subscribe if you want to know what they finally discovered, because when they told me, I wished they hadn't. How do we treat it? I asked. Oral antifungals, terbinafine or itraconazole. Treatment can take weeks to months, and sometimes first-line medications aren't effective. The diagnosis provided temporary psychological relief, a name for the horror, a documented pathogen with treatment protocols. But that relief evaporated as I learned more about TM7, the treatment duration, the resistance potential, the possibility of permanent scarring. I started terbinafine, 250 milligrams daily. The side effects hit immediately: nausea, headaches, a metallic taste that made food barely tolerable. Instructions to avoid alcohol and monitor liver function added new layers of medical anxiety. After 2 weeks on terbinafine, there was no improvement. If anything, the lesions were spreading. They now covered approximately 30% of my genital area. The texture was evolving from merely scaly to something more aggressive. The edges were becoming darker, almost black in some areas. Not just abnormal skin anymore, something that looked like dying tissue. By week 3, the evolution was undeniable. The scaly patches were developing a necrotic quality, dead tissue. The smell intensified, becoming genuinely nauseating, the kind of odor that made me avoid any situation involving close contact with other people. The treatment was failing, and my body was continuing its transformation into something I no longer recognized. Dr. Hernandez switched me to itraconazole at week 3, a more aggressive antifungal with correspondingly worse side effects. The nausea became constant, debilitating. My liver enzymes required weekly monitoring through blood draws that added medical appointments to an already overwhelming schedule. Food became an ordeal rather than sustenance. I lost 12 pounds in 2 weeks simply because eating felt impossible. The metallic taste from the medication turned everything bitter. The constant nausea meant most meals ended with me hunched over the toilet, retching up whatever I'd managed to swallow. But the medication's side effects were nothing compared to what my body was doing. The smell evolved from unpleasant to genuinely nauseating, not just noticeable, overpowering. The kind of biological decay odor that triggers instinctive revulsion. I could smell it through boxer briefs, through jeans, through multiple layers of clothing. Other people could too. I saw it in their reactions on the rare occasions I left my apartment. The subtle nose wrinkle, the step backward, the quick termination of conversations. By week 5, the lesions covered approximately 40% of my shaft and had begun spreading onto my scrotum. The texture had fully transformed from scaly patches into something that looked like dead tissue. Actual ulceration was beginning in several areas, open sores that wept fluid and refused to heal. The visual horror was undeniable. When I forced myself to look, and I compulsively checked multiple times daily, I barely recognized what I was seeing as part of my body. Black edges around gray-brown centers. Tissue that looked like it belonged in a morgue, not attached to a living person. The pain had become constant. Not sharp pain, but a deep, wrong sensation that radiated through my entire pelvic area. Sleep became nearly impossible, not just from physical discomfort, but from the knowledge of what was happening to me. At week 6, Dr. Hernandez referred me to Dr. Michael Chang, a dermatologist specializing in rare and treatment-resistant fungal infections. The appointment felt like a potential turning point. It wasn't. "I'm not convinced we're looking at TM7, Dr. Chang said after his examination. "The progression pattern is more aggressive than what we typically see with dermatophytes, even resistant strains." What else could it be? Several possibilities: polymicrobial infection, fungal and bacterial components working together, atypical mycobacterial infection. There are rare tropical fungi that cause this kind of presentation, especially after travel to West Africa. New tests were ordered: tissue biopsies, mycobacterial cultures, more sophisticated fungal identification requiring specialized laboratory analysis. The biopsy procedure was traumatic in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not just the physical pain, though having tissue cut from already damaged, inflamed areas was excruciating, but the psychological violation of watching a physician remove pieces of my diseased flesh for analysis. Each sample felt like confirmation that whatever was happening might be permanent. Every piece of tissue they removed for testing felt like losing a part of myself I'd never get back. "How long for results?" I asked. "Mycobacterial cultures can take 6 to 8 weeks. Fungal identification might be faster, but if we're dealing with a rare species, it could require additional time. 6 to 8 weeks. 2 more months of uncertainty, of progressive symptoms, of not knowing what was consuming my body." The prospect triggered something approaching complete psychological breakdown. The medical system that had always felt reassuring, problems have diagnoses, diagnoses have treatments, had failed. Multiple specialists, dozens of tests, thousands of dollars in medical expenses, and I was further from answers than when I'd started. My body was winning, and nobody could tell me how to stop it. The health anxiety that had been manageable before Lagos exploded into full-blown panic disorder. Every morning began with the same ritual: photographing the lesions from multiple angles, documenting any changes in color, texture, or size. I created elaborate spreadsheets tracking pain levels, discharge characteristics, medication side effects, daily measurements. The same engineering skills I'd used to architect cloud infrastructure were now devoted to documenting my body's deterioration. The spreadsheets gave me an illusion of control. If I could quantify the progression, maybe I could understand it. Maybe I could debug my own flesh like faulty code. It didn't work. The panic attacks started during week 4. Multiple times daily, my heart would race, my breathing would become shallow and rapid, and I'd be consumed by absolute certainty that I was dying. Not metaphorically, literally dying, right then, in that moment. The attacks lasted anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes. They left me exhausted, shaking, convinced that the next one would be fatal. Dr. Hernandez prescribed lorazepam for acute episodes. The medication helped with immediate symptoms, but created new anxieties. I'd read enough about benzodiazepines to know the dependency risks. Now I was worried about addiction on top of everything else. Every dose became a calculation. Was this panic attack severe enough to justify the medication? Was I developing tolerance? Would I be able to stop taking it once this was over? If this was ever over? Sleep became impossible. When exhaustion finally dragged me under, my dreams were filled with medical horror. Rotting tissue spreading across my entire body. Surgical procedures where physicians removed pieces of me until nothing remained. Waking up to discover the infection had consumed my genitals entirely, leaving nothing but necrotic void. I'd wake in cold sweats multiple times per night, immediately checking the lesions with my phone's flashlight, convinced they'd spread while I slept. The catastrophizing generalized to every bodily sensation. A mild headache meant the infection had spread to my brain. Fatigue from the medications became evidence of liver failure. A slight stomach ache suggested systemic organ involvement. Random muscle twitches were neurological symptoms. Every sensation, everywhere in my body, became potential evidence of disease progression. Work became impossible to sustain. How do you participate in system design meetings when you're convinced your body is decomposing? How do you review code when you're having 3 panic attacks daily? I started working remotely full-time, then reduced my hours, then essentially disappeared from all professional responsibilities. By week 7, I was placed on indefinite medical leave. The social isolation intensified exponentially. I stopped answering calls from friends and family. The thought of explaining my absence without revealing the truth felt impossible. But the alternative, telling people I'd contracted a mysterious infection while engaging in sex tourism, was equally unthinkable. I couldn't join online support groups for people with chronic illnesses because my condition felt too shameful to discuss, even anonymously. I couldn't seek support from friends because doing so required explaining the source. The isolation created a feedback loop. The more isolated I became, the more my entire identity organized around my medical condition. The shame evolved beyond the Lagos encounters. Every dating app interaction from the past decade felt predatory in retrospect. Every casual hookup became evidence of a pattern. Every transactional approach to relationships felt like proof that I'd always been capable of exploitation. The fact that I'd needed to travel to a developing country to access commercial sex felt like the ultimate expression of everything wrong with my character. I was no longer Marcus the principal engineer. I was no longer Marcus the millionaire. I wasn't Marcus who'd graduated from Stanford or Marcus who'd climbed the tech ladder. I was Marcus the contaminated, Marcus the diseased, Marcus who'd gotten exactly what he deserved. But the physical symptoms were only half the nightmare. The shame was metastasizing faster than any infection. There's a distinction psychologists make between guilt and shame that became viscerally relevant to my experience. Guilt is about actions, regretting what you did. Shame is about identity, believing you are fundamentally defective. I was drowning in shame. I wasn't just someone who'd made a bad choice. I was bad, rotten at the core, and now my body was manifesting what had always been true about my character. The physical decay felt like external proof of internal corruption. I stopped all contact with friends and family. My phone became a collection of unanswered messages and missed calls. Former colleagues checking in about my absence from work. College friends suggesting we grab dinner. My parents asking if everything was okay. I couldn't answer any of them. Every conversation would require lies or revelations, and I was capable of neither. The complete isolation meant I had no emotional buffers against the catastrophic thinking. Without work achievements or social connections to provide alternative identity frameworks, my entire sense of self became organized around being diseased, contaminated, deserving of suffering. Every relationship from the past decade was reframed through the lens of exploitation. That woman I dated for 3 months in 2022, had I really cared about her, or was she just another optimization target? The casual encounters through dating apps, had I ever seen these women as actual humans, or just as means to an end? The fact that I'd eventually needed to travel to a developing country for commercial sex felt like the inevitable conclusion of always treating people as transactions. The financial devastation added practical crisis to psychological collapse. I'd spent over $40,000 in 4 months pursuing treatments ranging from scientifically plausible to desperately experimental. Tea tree oil protocols recommended by naturopathic practitioners. Research chemicals ordered from gray market suppliers promising antifungal properties not available through FDA-approved medications. Ozone therapy sessions at $300 each that provided zero measurable benefit. Specialized dietary supplements. Consultation fees with specialists across multiple states. The costs accumulated while my savings systematically evaporated. Desperation drove me to consider increasingly dangerous options. Medical tourism to countries with more liberal pharmaceutical regulations. Unapproved medications available overseas. I contacted researchers studying exotic tropical pathogens, hoping my case might warrant experimental treatments. The intrusive thoughts started around week 10. Not active plans, exactly, but persistent awareness that ending my life might be preferable to indefinite progression. That permanent solutions existed for problems that had no medical resolution. The thoughts terrified me, but I couldn't discuss them with anyone, because doing so required explaining how I'd gotten here. The punishment felt cosmically appropriate. I'd exploited women's bodies for my gratification. Now my body was rotting as payment. The symbolism was too precise to ignore. I'd treated human beings as commodities, purchased access to their bodies while they performed intimacy they didn't feel. Now my own body was betraying me, decomposing while I remained conscious, forcing me to witness every stage of deterioration. Some part of me believed I deserved this, that cosmic justice was being served, that the universe was delivering proportional consequences for moral bankruptcy. The physical decay and moral decay had become inseparable, feeding each other in a cycle that felt impossible to break. It's been 4 months since I returned from Lagos. My apartment has transformed into a medical monitoring facility. Bandages and topical medications cover every bathroom surface. Prescription bottles line the kitchen counter. Oral antifungals, antibiotics, anti-inflammatory drugs, anti-anxiety medications, sleep aids. Medical waste bins overflow with contaminated dressings. The smell of antiseptic can't mask the underlying odor of decay. The test results remain inconclusive. The tissue biopsy showed chronic inflammatory changes with fungal elements, but definitive species identification has been elusive. The lesson isn't complicated. Treat people as humans, not as means to your ends. Don't let modern disconnection drive you toward exploitation disguised as experience. Don't tell yourself that economic exchange erases moral implications. Don't rationalize your way into actions you know are wrong, because the price of exploitation isn't always immediate, but it always comes due. My body is rotting. My career is gone. My financial security is evaporating. My mental health is shattered. The social connections I once had have dissolved. The future I envisioned no longer exists. But the worst consequence isn't physical or financial. It's the knowledge that I caused harm to vulnerable people in pursuit of feeling something my hollow existence couldn't provide. That I participated in systems of exploitation because my disconnection made me desperate for any form of authentic experience. The digital age promises connection while delivering isolation. It offers optimization while creating emptiness. It provides access to everything except what we actually need. Genuine human relationships built on mutual respect rather than power differentials. Don't make my mistakes. Don't let algorithmic social life convince you that transactional approaches to human connection are acceptable. Don't travel seeking exploitation and call it experience. The consequences may not be immediate, but they're real and they're devastating.